see any activity in there?
And I'd never really heard of Bone Tomahawk. It just kind of flashed up, you know, the little thumbnail with Kurt Russell. And, well, I'm a big fan of Kurt Russell, as you can probably tell. And I thought, you know what, any film with Kurt Russell, I'll give it a go. It's a Western, one of my favourite genres. Went into this one blind, Declan. By the end of the film, I was fucking in shock and awe, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, I was in shock in two ways. Firstly, how fucked up the violence is in this movie. But also, I knew this film was known for its violent scenes, and it was one of those movies where if you probably hadn't seen the film, but you probably had someone show you the scene from it. The scene, you know what we're talking about, we'll come to later.
Yeah.
Or certain scenes just for its brutality. And that's kind of what put me off, to be honest. I thought, I do like horror movies. I like really uber violent horror movies, but I go out of phases with them. I don't love torture porn sort of movies. And I kind of just avoided it for that reason. Although something in the back of my mind, I was like, Kurt Russell, Matthew Fox, Patrick Wilson, these people don't really star in a torture porn movie. And I'd heard it was really good. When I sat down to watch it, because this was the first time I'd seen it, I didn't realise how much I was going to enjoy it and be impressed by it. You know, the first hour and 40 minutes, other than the opening scene, which I felt was actually a little bit wonky and not done very well. From that moment onwards, it was this incredibly confidently directed film that was happy to take its time, tell the story really slowly, take long periods where it just dips into characters.
Yeah, I think the first scene, I echo your thoughts on that, because, you know, as an opening scene, it was weak.
When I was doing my notes while I was watching it, I wrote, weak opening scene. And then I was like, but the next scene's actually pretty good. Every scene remained really good after that.
Yeah.
That's why it stuck out like such a sore thumb. It was essential. You know, it is what sets up the whole rest of the movie.
Maybe we shouldn't be going someplace that looks like a burial ground.
Listen clear. We are coming through here, like it or not.
Yeah.
The storytelling that felt so intentioned and purposeful in the rest of the film just wasn't there in it. But from that point onwards, it's just amazing as you get David Arquette playing against type as this kind of like, well, I guess not against type if you remember his role in Scary Movie, but he basically plays a bumbling, uneducated, murdering moron who inadvertently leads this tribe, if you'd call it a tribe, of mutant, inbred, barely even human offshoot from Native Americans. That they're probably closer to the creatures out of The Descent than they are to actual humans. And I found that a really interesting idea because, you know, that, like in The Descent, it's really fascinating to think of not quite human, but very close to human, recent evolutionary offshoots. Because there's something so disturbing about seeing an animalistic version of a human.
I was thinking the other day the best way to describe him, and I kind of like summed it up inside my own head as a Native American tribe of the hills have eyes.
Yeah.
And it rhymes. But it's set up nicely because David Arquette's character, we didn't know that about him at the time early on in the scenes. Kurt Russell goes to question him in a bar. They're talking amongst each other and David Arquette's being all defensive. And Kurt Russell just ends up kneecapping him and everyone's like, why did you do that? Like
I just told you, I ain't got no weapon.
Because you put him in that hole you dug.
They go and call on Patrick Wilson's wife, who is kind of like an understudy doctor because it turns out that the main doctor is, by all accounts, a bit of a pisshead, and he's been on the booze, so she's got to step in, sort of do the surgery on the wound, and it's kind of left there, and you're like thinking, why do we have to see all this? It's a bit pointless, and then it really kicks off from there.
So, the next morning, Patrick Wilson is woken up by the sheriff, who informs him that several horses were stolen, the stable boy was murdered, and his wife and the deputy who was in charge of looking after her while she was taking care of the patient and prisoner have all disappeared. Also, they heard some strange noises in the night. It sounded kind of like a weird cross between human screams and animal howls.
Are you done?
I need to clean the wound and sew it shut.
The deputy sheriff is walking with flowers to his wife's grave, and then he stumbles across the black stable boy who's been like savaged. He finds an arrow. So then they bring in, do you remember that kind of other Native American guy?
Sort of like a Native American that was seemingly westernized.
Yeah, because he's wearing a suit and They all assemble in the bar, and the Native American guy is pretty cool.
It's good seeing. It's kind of like the scene in Jaws where they scrapes down the chalkboard. And he gives them the whole like spiel of this is what the monster that you're gonna face sort of scene, and you hear about how messed up, and even the Native American guy, he's like, this is not a Native American tribe. This is a whole other thing you're dealing with.
They're a spoiled bloodline of inbred animals that rape and eat their own mothers.
What do they look like?
A man like you would not distinguish them from Indians, even though they're something else entirely.
He kind of reminds me of, in Zulu, the kind of like South African advisor guy that's in Rorke's Drift.
Right,
and he's like telling them all about how there's Zulu warriors warfare and they're like savages. It was kind of like that. This is where we kind of see Matthew Fox as well show his true colours, because he's in the bar. He basically wants to go and help find the people that have been kidnapped, because he summoned the wife to go and operate on.
He's also definitely got the hots for his wife.
He's got the hots for the wife, and he just brazenly just goes, "Oh, I've killed a lot of Indians," and the poor westernized Native Indian guy just goes, "Oh, that's a big boast," and he's like, "I'm not boasting."
And I've killed more Indians than everyone here put together.
Well, it's an ugly boast.
It isn't a boast, but a fact.
Yeah, he kind of chalks it up to, it's just matter of fact, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But you see his bigotry comes out more and more as the film goes on.
He's proud of this. He's proud that he's killed these
people. He feels like he revels in it. But he's not your run-of-the-mill, we let you know this guy's a bad guy by having him have prejudiced views or these quirks. He also has a lot of really positives about him. And he does some great stuff in this movie and selfless stuff. But he just probably wouldn't do it for a Mexican or a Native American. Which is great, because all these characters feel very rich and real and lifelike.
These kind of scenes are, in other films, sometimes they feel a bit filler before it gets to the kind of action, but they kind of very, very nicely in the few scenes they are set up all the characters. It's brilliantly done.
One song costs 3 cents. Why do 3 songs cost a dime?
Well, I get tired after 2, so the third cost extra.
Hitchcock always had a thing where he said, even if it was a character who was just a tea lady that was walking past, if she had a line, he wanted to somehow give you a feeling of her entire life through that. And I got that from the characters in this movie. The backup deputy, who's kind of a bumbling idiot, but really good character. But there's a great moment later on where he gets talking about performing surgery or amputations on people during the war, which he had to do. A lot of the time they still don't survive. And Kurt Russell says that sounds like an awful last couple of days on Earth. And he just says, yep. And he nods, and it's the way the camera lingers on him and the way he nods where you just get this idea of like the horrible shit this poor guy's seen, and you can see he's going back there in his mind. Patrick Wilson, when he doesn't want to read the poem he apparently wrote for his wife, aloud to her when she asks him to. After she's gone, he reads it to himself, and you can see it still means a lot to him, but he also is all defensive about the fact that it's not a poem, it's just a letter, and he wrote some ideas down.
And we're about to kiss for the first time in months. Well, that ain't a poem.
Well, Matthew Fox, who plays a pretty volatile, racist character in it, also a very charismatic character. But you have a nice moment where he realises his horse is been killed by some bandits when they were trying to steal him. He goes over and takes a moment and puts it down, and you can see it really affects him. And you get a little insight to, he's a piece of shit, but he's not inhuman.
Thank you for your service.
Like Kurt Russell's character at one point tells him he has no morals at all. But even though he is a piece of shit, you kind of end up liking him by the end of it. You know, he's racist. He boasts about killing Mexicans and Native Indians. But, you know, he's also, at the drop of a hat, gone on this rescue mission for a guy's wife who he doesn't particularly like. But to be fair, he might have feelings for the wife as well.
Yeah, I think he fancies the wife.
Oh, don't you talk that way about my wife. I know you had designs.
That was years ago. And she refused me.
There was a feel of Dusk Till Dawn when I was watching this, where it's two halves to the movie, where the first is a very slow, methodical, character-based Western. And the second half is a torture porn horror movie.
Yeah.
And it blends in perfectly with each other. There isn't really, like, in Dusk Till Dawn, as much as I'd made that comparison, there's a pretty clear cut-off point that involves Quentin Tarantino sucking on some toes. In this movie, it really naturally blends one into the other, but it still feels so distinct and separate from each other.
Yeah.
There really is no horror tension, no horror scenes in the whole first half of the movie.
Yeah.
But I love the first half of the movie. I kind of preferred, in some ways, the first half of the movie. If this was just a Western that was a normal rescue mission and it didn't really go into the crazy murky waters it did, I would have still loved it. It was great.
And then he lets them know that they're sort of cannibalistic. The black stable boy who's been killed, they question why didn't they kind of take his body away to eat it? And then they said they don't eat black guys. And I was like, I don't really understand this dynamic. They're cannibals, but they choose what they eat. And that's kind of revealed later on.
Yeah, and maybe just so... Maybe they encounter so fewer black people that they're just kind of a bit like, what is that?
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
But yeah, no, I thought that was interesting. But anyway, so we get to the motherfucking rescue mission. Kurt Russell gets everyone together and they head off. Matthew Fox joins, the backup deputy joins, Patrick Wilson with his hobbling leg joins.
They're warned several times that this is essentially a suicide mission because you got to remember, they're going out into the desert. They kind of know they're in a cave, but they don't know where it is. They might not even make it to the cave. The desert might just take them. And they're like, I'm not going to call them the A team. I'm going to call them the Z team because that's how shit they are. Yeah. You've got a cripple, essentially. You've got old man deputy, who they actually call, who Kurt Russell doesn't even name half the time. He just says old man.
You all right, old man?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I thought I had it.
And it's like, you're going to die.
Well, hold up. You said half of the team. The other team is Kurt Russell.
That is true.
Who accounts for at least two people.
That's a good point.
And Matthew Fox in this is cool as shit.
Yeah, he is. Yeah,
very arrogant, but very intelligent. Maybe he might have been the best shooter out of the group as well.
And to be fair, he's wearing like the coolest all-white suit. And you're like, this guy's gonna fuck shit up. He looks like Colonel Saunders, but
and then we have a lot of sequences for a while where it's just them traveling across this, barren landscape, but it's still not action. It's just having moments with the characters, and there's a couple of times where they have some encounters at night. There's these two Mexican fellas that appear.
Relax, gentlemen, relax. Don't be scared. I am a friend.
And they put their guns down and they seem like they might be friendly, but Matthew Fox just kills them both.
Yeah.
Damn you!
And it creates a bit of a moral dilemma, but then the next night they do have some horse thieves who seemingly were friends with the Mexicans, take all their horses, nearly kill Matthew Fox.
Yeah.
But it just kind of meanders along. You could take out probably like 20, 30 minutes of the movie from that section, but I felt like I could watch another 8 hours of that.
Yeah.
Like even just them sitting down at the end of the night or getting their water, it was just so watchable.
I like this middle bit because in a lot of films it's filler and you're like, oh, they're rambling on. But it's when they're kind of sitting down and making up camp and talking to each other, it furthers the character development that we've already had, and you kind of get to know all the characters a bit more. And it's like, you can see that they're genuinely nice people. They're very concerned about Patrick Wilson and his leg, because, you know, he's not really fit to do this trip, but he wants to save his wife, and they're all like, I don't know, he shouldn't really be here, but you've got to admire his determination.
It gets to the point where, because he can't keep pace with him, he just says, all right, just go on without me, and then I will eventually catch you up when you stop to sleep or rest, and then I'll sleep for like the half hour that you're still waiting there for, and then I'll keep on after you, and just lay little rocks along the way. Yeah. And he is just a hobbling Terminator in this movie. Like, he's just relentless. And it is funny, like you said, because Matthew Fox, again, he's such an interesting character in this, where he taunts him a little at one point in a kind of joking way, where they're about to set off again, and he says, hey, if we get there before you, then I promise not to flirt with your wife while I'm there.
Yeah. If we get there before you catch up, I'll try to refrain from flirting with Mrs. O'Dwyer.
And he doesn't take it as a joke. He swings through him, falls over and busts his leg up. And they think they might even have to cut it off at this point because he's hurt it again so badly. But you see, Matthew Fox is just a bit like, oh, come on, I've come on a suicide mission to help save your wife. Can I make a little innuendo or a joke every now and then? Like, what is the problem? And you kind of see his point a bit.
Do you think that Matthew Fox really thinks it is a suicide mission? Do you think that he just went to essentially think he was going to survive, but he wanted to murder these Indians, basically?
No, a couple of things. I think murdering Indians he's not like out of his mind hateful of Indians, so I think that would have just been, in his mind, maybe a bonus.
Yeah.
I think part of it is that no one has any idea just how fucked up the situation they're about to get into is. Another part of it would be, it's that kind of time of the era gentleman nobility of like, well, I was the one who escorted her there, so of course I have to die finding her.
I'm the one who fetched your wife, got her involved. Got a responsibility to you both.
And it's also the fact that he definitely has feelings for her.
Yeah, 100%. But we do see in another scene his arrogance in this, because there's one scene which is pretty funny where he just turns around and was like, no, there's no shadow of a doubt, I'm the cleverest man here. And they like start arguing with him, and like the biddy old like deputy sheriff is like, what makes you say that? And then he says, well, you're all married, aren't you? I'm not. And then it adds another like kind of bigot string to his bow that he's also a bit sexist.
I mean, no one really disagreed at that point.
Yeah.
But also, that's another thing. This movie's surprisingly funny. Like the old timer backup deputy, at one point, Matthew Fox's character asks him,
Are any of you somnambulists?
That's private.
You need to sleepwalk.
Oh, no, I don't.
I just love the way he was so like, he had no idea, but he just thought it was some
man.
But also, it's like, what kind of dick asked that word? No one knows that word.
Yeah, it's like.
Well, Patrick Wilson seemingly did. 50% of the people there did, but I guarantee 50% of the normal population do not know that
It's
word.
basically like one of us going on like University Challenge, and like everyone buzzing in, and they're like, do you know this?
Yeah.
And we're just sitting there like...
It's that dickhead who asks, oh, do you know what blah, blah, blah is?
Yeah.
So that they can tell you, because they know you're not
going
to
like,
know.
You know that we don't fucking know, don't you, you bastard? What I also liked about it, Declan, is it's very watchable. That you know that these scenes are kind of like the sum of the parts, because you know that slowly as each scene passes, you're kind of like sitting there in anticipation, like they're going to encounter them soon. They're going to encounter them.
Yeah, and it builds up such a tension because there's no movie beats that lead up to that. They're just meandering and journeying, and Patrick Wilson hobbles and catches them up, and then they go off again, and he's alone for a bit, and they're alone for a bit, and they're getting deeper and deeper into the barren landscape, and closer, more and more mountains, more and more caves. But it doesn't have that feel of they're about to come by them. It just feels like it could have played on like that for 5 hours before you call them, or 10 minutes. They just suddenly get attacked one day.
Yeah.
But it builds up the tension for you as the audience, because you're like, shit's going to go down. You've heard this movie's reputation, but it just keeps not coming. It keeps being this calm, even kill up until they actually come across him.
The way they built this up, I thought something else was going to happen, to be honest. Like, they make this big kind of hoo-ha about, the telescope. Matthew Fox, because he's cool as fuck, by all accounts, has a telescope that he got from Germany somewhere, and he's, passing it round. I thought that they're going to, like, use it and, like, spy on them. And, like, in the distance, we're advanced and civilized and we're going to outwit you and, like, flank you and make all these plans and shit. But I like the way that they just get jumped upon, and I felt that was a much better way to do it rather than that. I guess the telescope was just there as I don't really know.
Red herring.
Yeah, red herring, I guess.
So the attack is nuts. Kurt Russell is hit with an arrow.
Yeah.
An arrow barely just scrapes over the old timer's head. Matthew Fox has his arm completely cut off with a tomahawk. And I think another one might go into his leg or an arrow.
Yeah.
But he scrambles away, arm cut off. They all scramble. They take out maybe 2 or 3 of them. And their appearance, this is the first time you properly see him, is brilliant. Like, it's such a cool design. Like, they seem to be wearing what is, I'm assuming, a mixture of paint and cave dust that they're caked in. And they have all these kind of weird body mods and impalements. They have these strange throat insertions, which I think it's basically they've grafted a whistle into their throat, which is how they create their signature screams. Echo through the movie, and when you hear it as an echoes, I thought maybe it was some sort of instrument. When you see it up close, it is such an interesting, cool scream because it does have this otherworldly feel to it, even though they're still grounded as they are just bizarro mutant humans.
I was trying to work this out whether they are more advanced than we actually give them credit for, because the colour of the cave dust blends them into the desert environment. So when they kind of ambush, they fucking come out of nowhere. It's just like whack. Yeah. They're on ya. What's really cool about this as well is their weapons, even though they're nowhere near as advanced as the guns, are just quicker. Like before anyone can just raise their gun to shoot, arrow or whack with the fucking tomahawk, which is a beast. Like the tomahawk axe in this, it looks like a fucking... They've cut off like an elephant tusk hole and they just bring it down on you.
It deserves the top billing and the title.
Yeah, it deserves the top billing.
So Matthew Fox does the old, I'm going to die, so let me take him out, some of them out, blah, blah speech.
We'll make sure all this has value.
Please do. I shall kill as many as I can.
So he says, leave me some dynamite and a cigar. So he's smoking the cigar. He says, perfect thing for his character, that he's too vain to live as a cripple with his arm missing, so he's just going to go out. I don't think he takes any of them out, if I'm honest. I think, because the last thing you see of him is one of the, I was going to say creatures, but one of the tribe running up and throwing a tomahawk at his head.
Yeah, fuck yeah.
So I'm guessing he didn't take any of them out, maybe one.
He didn't take any out, no, because unfortunately the rest of the crew get captured. When the deputy is getting dragged off, sadly, you see him with the tomahawk just lodged into his head and he doesn't even get a chance to get a shot off. So, all in all, bit of a shit death.
So, meanwhile, Patrick Wilson is still lagging behind, so he doesn't even know any of this has happened yet, thankfully. Kurt Russell and the old timer wake up behind some, like, rudimentary wooden prison cells inside the caves. Patrick Wilson's wife and the deputy, who's basically is in the cage opposite. And I remember thinking, she's a bit fucking ungrateful, isn't she?
This is why frontier life is so difficult. Not because of the Indians or the elements, but because of the idiots.
I'm sorry, ma'am.
Yeah, she's like, why did you come here?
And she keeps... It's one thing, like, I get you're upset. God knows what's been happening to her.
Probably
they hint at it really, again, beautifully written, beautifully directed, beautifully acted, where he asks her, how many men are there? Because he just wants to know, like, how many do we have to kill? And she kind of goes silent and starts crying before answering. And it's a perfect thing where it just, without saying it, it tells you, your imagination fills in all the gaps of what must have been happening to this poor girl while she was here. But even still, she says, like, why did you bring my husband here? Blah, blah, blah. He's going to die too. And they're like, we're sorry. But then she keeps drilling the point home and calling them idiots. It's like, hey, bitch, do you realise I'm going to die now because I came on a suicide mission to save you? Like, calm down.
And they must be fucking shitting it because they know what they do, and it's like...
Well, they know what they do because I guess as a show to the two men, the head of the tribe takes out the deputy who's lucid, conscious but not quite lucid. He's kind of like, he recognises Kurt Russell as the sheriff, but doesn't really know what's going on. And in front of him, they scalp him very slowly, peeling back his scalp. Then they force a bunch of material into his mouth, put in a spike and hammer the spike in so it forces it as far as it can. Strip him completely naked, turn him upside down, and with one of their tomahawk axe type things, whatever they are, slowly, while he's still alive and still screaming, cut him in half from the arse first, sideways, down the middle.
And then, you know, they don't even finish cutting him down the middle. They pull his legs and rip him in half.
And various organs and stuff just sort of spill out.
Sorry, I have literally had this scene in my head all day. It's disgusting.
Yeah, it really, 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 really is disturbing. And it's the fact that he's still alive for so long of it. I don't know if it's because the special effects are so good, or the acting's so good, or the shots are good, or the reactions of Kurt Russell and the other actors are so good, but it might be the most disturbing death scene I've ever seen in a film.
I mean, it's still stuck in my head now, and it's like, when I first watched it, I was like, afterwards, I guess they put it in because it would have been like that then. They were that violent, and they did scalp people.
This director he likes his violence. Like, if you've seen any of his other films, like Brawl in Cell Block 19 or whatever it's called, he likes extremely violent moments. And that's good. And did you know what? I have a thing where I get if you don't want to see it, but I don't get when people are critical of that kind of version of violence in films. Because I don't get why the cartoonish violence is okay, but when you show it give it the gravitas it actually has in reality, why that's suddenly a bad thing to do.
But this kind of makes me laugh, Declan, because sometimes a film does do gratuitous violence for violence sake. I think it fits because, you know, they're a cannibal tribe and they would have been this savage. They'd have scalped people before, so it's par for the course in these times, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think this sort of thing would have been going on in the Middle Ages, probably, you know, as recently as the 19th century. It wouldn't have been that uncommon to see. You know, it might not have been specifically scalping, but horrendous torture, horrendous murder, institutionalized sort of killings in this fashion. But just seeing it depicted with modern special effects is so shocking, and especially amazing because this movie had a budget of 1.8 million.
Is that it?
Yeah, it was shot in 21 days. And it has an epic scope and feel to it. The violence and gore and special effects that are in it are so well done. Like, it really is amazing. Like, the fact that the budget is that tiny is just astounding. They were able to cut a couple of corners where a lot of the costumes and actually Kurt Russell's entire beard was borrowed from the Hateful Eight.
What makes me laugh about this, going back to the violence of the scene, is they can show you this, but then they can't show you the horse getting shot.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I reckon there'd be more uproar if you saw him shooting the horse. Like, it's all like, he leans over it, you know he's going to do it. But imagine the uproar if you see a horse getting shot live and it's like, ooh.
Yeah, and it's probably not even... That is true what you're saying, but it probably wasn't that decision-making going behind it. It's that storytelling thing of what you show, what you don't show, and how you show it, essentially, is what directing comes down to. But there's something about the not showing the horse being shot and then showing this so violently and graphically. It tells completely different stories. And the decision was correct in both scenarios.
Yeah, I agree. Going back to the budget... The 1.8 million, is that inclusive of fees paid to actors?
Yeah.
Because Kurt Russell must have taken fucking shitloads of his Kurt Russell.
I mean, considering the cast, I wouldn't be surprised if all of them no fee at all.
Really?
Oh yeah, like with that cast it had, and it was a 1.8 million budget, I can't imagine any of them took anything other than a token fee for the movie.
I get you. And you said about borrowing stuff from Hateful Eight. The cave used in this was actually the same cave they used for Iron Man, the first
No
one,
way, yeah.
where he's building the suit, his first suit when he's trapped in the terrorist cage. Bit trivia for you.
Right. So, thankfully after that, Kurt Russell's able to get their own back a little bit, because they still have some morphine in a bottle, which they brought and they were using with Patrick Wilson. And they took ahead of them because they thought maybe the wife might need it when they got to her. So they pretend to be like drinking it and like put it into a booze bottle, and they're like playing it up with theatrics to get the guards interested. And they nick it off them and they start looking at it. One of them drinks a load, another one drinks a little bit, and one of them just barely touches it. So they know only one of those is definitely dead. The other maybe, and the third one's going to be fine. So it's not long before a couple of them die and they realise what's going on. So they start bringing them out and they're going to kill Kurt Russell.
I, to be honest, would have probably just killed myself at this point, because, like, seeing that in front of me, right, what are the chances of Cripple Boy coming to save me here? I'd be like, shall we just kill ourselves here? Because they're still going to eat us anyway, and I don't really want to be scalped and my cock, like, chopped up with a tomahawk, so, yes.
That's why we're not Kurt Russell.
He
doesn't think that. So while this is going on and their little plan is going ahead, we have Patrick Wilson arrives at the scene. He's really funny. He's sort of just asleep next to the cave. I guess he's just passed out because he is like, his leg is virtually going gangrene. He's probably going to lose it if he survives all this. And he's been like trekking through the desert, basically doing a daily marathon on a broken leg in the desert with barely any water. So he's like passed out, resting for a second. The cannibals just sneak up on him and shoot him with an arrow while he's sleeping. And you see, he like freaks out. He shoots one of them. The other one's running at him. It's this great tense scene where he's fired a bunch of shots, hit him a couple of times, but none of them have been a kill shot. One of the shots destroys the cannibal's bow and arrow. So he runs off for his tomahawk. And while he's running off nearby for the tomahawk, Patrick Wilson's trying to load his gun.
It's very tense. Like, you have to watch it to get the real tenseness, but he's literally like this close to him. You're like, he's gone. Like, so cool scene, man.
And Patrick Wilson goes and inspects one of the bodies, and that's when we finally get a proper look at how they can scream the way they can in the film, because they have these implants, like I said before that, which are sort of like these made out of bone whistles that they surgically embed into their throat and voice box. Which means they can create this really unique and distinct whistling sound when they scream, which I assume is how they identify each other from each other and also reach really long distances, and they can tell it. So he rips it out of the thing's throat and starts using it as a whistle himself. And it's smart because he can attract them, because they'll hear it and they'll come running. So he starts sort of limping about in the bush and blowing the whistle, and every now and then one of these little gross, pasty-looking monsters will come out and it will just blap him in the head or stab him or shoot him or whatever. And again, this is so good where the big rescue action sequence feels really believable and grounded. He doesn't swing in and take his crutch out of his leg and impale someone with it or do something super heroic. He kind of just gets in just at the nick of time and tricks all the cannibals. And that's how he gets them, using his whistle.
There's one scene in the lead up to this where one's running at him. He like kind of just shoots him in the head, and then later on he inspects the body, and it's just a little kid, and you're like, oh, fuck. It's that whole morality thing. But I'm sorry, you're gonna kill him.
I'd fucking be genociding this entire species.
Like, I'm sorry, you're chasing me with a fucking giant tomahawk. Like, you are getting shot. Like,
oh my god! These things, like, I mean, I suppose they are kind of still. They are. I guess still human.
I thought when we first saw them with all the like mods and shit, I was thinking Predator vibes. Like, are these things mutants?
They literally have. They've impaled tusks into their face. Some of them, and like really cool design, really horrific looking. But I guess they sort of still human. I'm just classing them as different species at this point, which maybe is not right, but. The guards inside, they've realised that a few of them have been poisoned, so they start pulling out Kurt Russell and the others, and they're going to start torturing them. They start slicing his stomach open. They start hearing whistling, which we know is Patrick Wilson, but they don't. One of them wanders off. It's such a horrible scene where he's got his foot on Kurt Russell's neck. They've got Kurt Russell's rifle, and he's aiming it right at his dick and balls.
Yeah, I hate it.
And he's trying to pull... you can see he's figured out, oh, you pulled the trigger, but he doesn't know how... Like, he's got to reload it, or he doesn't know what he's doing. And he's trying to get it to fight. Like, he's just desperate. And that's the thing about these guys is they don't just kill you. They're like, no, let's rip off his dick and balls. Let's rip his eyeballs out and then make him live for 2 weeks and we'll put, like, rats in it or something. You know, they look for the most horrific way to fuck you up before they kill you.
This scene's funny because he's fiddling around, like, trying to reload it. It's like, kind of like that scene in Austin Powers where Scott's like, why don't you just shoot him?
Yeah.
It's like, why don't you just go and get, like, one of your axes and just fucking... Do you know what I mean? But at this point, you're like, oh, God, Kurt Russell's going to die. But then you're like, hang on, this is Kurt Russell, so he's not going to die. Do you know?
At least not get his dick blown.
Yeah.
That would just be such a traumatizing way.
Then again, Declan, this film is done so well that you are thinking... possibly he will shoot him in the dick because you never know what's going to happen.
I thought fully that was
happen. And this scene is very, very gruesome because he's kind of distracted by the whistle and Kurt Russell spins around and sees one of his tomahawks. It just zooms into the tribe's guy's foot and you're like, oh God, like what? We know what's going to happen here. It's zoomed into his foot and you just see whack and all his toes come off. And you're like, right, that's not as bad as a scalping scene, but it's very gruesome still. Like.
Also completely forgot that at one point casually, Kurt Russell, when he was watching the deputy die, he was trying to shake the bars, and they just casually cut 4 of his fingers off. So he's doing all this with like 2 fingers left.
And then all he does is turn around to the deputy. He's cool as fuck. He's like, tied off. And his fingers are like all bleeding out.
The cannibal with its foot cut off falls over and he stands up and whacks his head off.
Oh.
And it was interesting because the first time he hit it, he looked like he hit it with a hammer. The second time he hit it, it looked like he cut its head off, but it felt like he punched it off nearly. Like the way the head rips off from the neck is just brilliant. And it's definitely a practical effect. And there's a physicality to it that really just adds to it. They managed to escape. Kurt Russell is been shot at this point because the cannibal accidentally loaded the gun and shot him by accident. So he's dying. He does the old, I'm not going to make it out of here, but you guys go ahead speech.
Say goodbye to my wife. I'll say hello to yours. Yes, sir.
Patrick Wilson's like, what can I do for you? Because obviously they know by this point that he's so mortally wounded. He's not going to make the journey back, is he? Like, because the journey back seemingly could have taken weeks even. Or they were just generally slow because of gangrene foot. He's like, give me the gun. I'm going to distract them. You get away. And this is a really, really well done final scene where they've escaped. We know there's 3 left by the numbers. All you hear is... They turn around to the deputy and go, were those gunshots? And there's kind of like tears in his eyes and he goes, they were. And it's like 3 gunshots signaling that good old Kurt had killed the 3 remaining. And that was his final act on Earth.
And you gotta love the deputy. Like, he's such a bumbling idiot, but he's so loyal. And he is such a good little handy second-in-command guy. So probably the second most disturbing thing in this movie for me was at the very end where they're escaped and they're walking out. They stop by what appears to be 2 tribeswomen who have spikes impaled in their eyes to blind them and have their legs and arms cut off and are pregnant. So immediately you just get this idea that they must be these baby makers that they keep alive, but virtually, remove their ways of moving, their limbs and their eyes, and they've essentially just turned them into baby factories. And you'd assume that this is how their entire culture works. So it's literally like the feminist worst case scenario of like life on Earth.
So like essentially, you're born a female, which is essentially a death sentence in this tribe because you're grown to be like a lamb to the slaughter. And I take it they probably like hide what's going to happen to them because like obviously when they're young, they've got to still like get to baby making age, I guess. Because if they see the pregnant women there with their legs chopped off and their arms chopped off and spikes coming out of their eyes, they're going to be like, right, I don't really want to stick around here. Do you know?
True, but I would assume, I don't know that those women were necessarily Native American or they might have been Caucasian. So I would imagine the only way this culture would work is they kidnap women, so they always have a constant supply of baby makers. You know, I'm assuming they probably kill the babies at birth if they're not born male. You're left with these questions because it is. You're left with these questions because it is brilliant world building. Where I want a sequel. I want an expanded universe. I want more. I want a more deeper dive into this tribe and this culture, and you know, maybe we can see it from another Native American tribe's point of view, where they're being tormented by this horrible cannibal tribe, and as they're trying to steal children off them or steal some of their wives in order to bring them back home or steal them for food. It's such an interesting little subculture, and it's told so well. And I just can't believe the budget was $1.8 million because it's so minimal and the production value is so classy. It feels like a big budget movie. And I remember thinking at the time when I just saw clips and shots of it, how did they afford that cast?
Yeah.
How did they afford that budget? Because I assumed it was a big budget to make a horror western. Like that's such a niche, probably not going to make any money genre. Like who financed this? And the answer is it was a tiny minimal budget. Like the kind of horror movies you'd get coming out of A24 are probably 2 or 3 million. This is such an insanely small budget for what you eventually get on the screen. It's so impressive. This is the only movie of this director that I hadn't yet seen, and it's definitely his best. It makes me really excited about what he's going to make in the future, because this film, it is a masterpiece. I actually think it is a 5-star, 10 out of 10 film.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Definitely one of the best films of the last 10 years. Probably the best horror film of the last 10 years.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that.
Probably the best Western of the last 10 years.
No, again, I totally agree with that. And I was really racking my brains. I cannot compare... There's only one other film that I can compare this film to. Ravenous.
Yeah.
A Western where they're cannibals as well. This is just another level to that. I went into this film personally not knowing anything about it. I wasn't like you, Declan, where I had seen that particular scene from the film. And it was great by that aspect because... You've got the slow bits at the start and you're like, oh, is this going to be like... I thought this was going to be cool as fuck. It's called Bone Tomahawk and they're just like debating in a civilised town and then bang. When the action scenes kick off, they kick off big time. But what makes this film great and a 10 out of 10 for me, it was actually the build-up to it, that the great, brilliant character development which really stuck by me, and I totally agree with your point. I could have watched another hour of that before the action started. And overall, it's near as perfect in a film that I've seen in the last 10 years, personally. I can't recommend this enough.
Yeah, easy recommendation for Bone Tomahawk. See you next week.
Those gunshots?
They were.